I'd like to thank everyone for joining us from Quebec, across Canada and the United States for our final virtual event as part of the Defeat Duchenne Family Forums for Montreal. This event was originally scheduled to be live, of course, back on Saturday, May 2nd at TRiNDS Hospital in Montreal, Quebec. However, the health and safety of our Duchenne boys and families, the speakers and staff is a priority. And so due to this COVID-19, we've all had to adapt. We want to thank you for your patience and appreciate your flexibility. We hope you have and will enjoy and find benefit in this new virtual format, now open to all families across Canada and around the world. Since we have new people joining us today, we're going to go through a quick introduction of Jesse's journey. Some of you, I know, are not familiar with the organization. We want to ask the question, how far would you go for someone you love? That was the question that led to the birth of Jesse's journey some 25 years ago when John and Shireen Davidson from London, Ontario, learned that their middle son, Jesse, was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. They charted a life-changing course for themselves, setting out to raise research funds to find a cure. Jesse's journey is known for its commitment to funding the most promising Duchenne research worldwide. And thanks to the generosity of our donors, this year marks the largest funding year to date. We have granted more than $1.6 million this year into the most promising research, of which you'll hear more about later this morning. But we're also committed to providing education for parents, families, and caregivers throughout their journey with Duchenne. And that's why we began these Defeat Duchenne Family Forums. We hosted the first forum in London last spring, and then in Calgary, Alberta last fall. We had families from across the country join us and attend both events. Now, we'd like to find out where you are joining us from today. Rochelle, would you mind launching the poll? Thank you. We'll just give you a minute to complete. All right. Let's see those results. Mostly Ontario. We have people from outside. 9% of the people joining are outside North America. Quebec, 27%. Ontario, 50%. Nova Scotia, USA, Alberta as well. So all over the place. Wonderful news. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That is terrific. And we also have another poll, just very quickly. We want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. If you'd mind just taking a moment to complete that, we'll see why you're here this morning. We'll see those results in just a second. There we are. The majority Duchenne parents, but related to families and related to the disease, sponsors. We have researchers and others. So thank you again very, very much. Very helpful information. A diversified group this morning. We want to welcome one and all. We want to also mention that prior to organizing this event, we had asked families, what do you want to know out of the spring forum and the fall forum of last year? And also when we were planning on coming to Quebec Live, we said, what is it you want to hear from? So I'm absolutely delighted this morning to have so many specialists, researchers, and clinicians from Canada, the USA, all joining us this morning. You'll hear about the latest in clinical trials and much, much more. We have a packed agenda of 7 amazing speakers. We may run late, as Rochelle has already warned you, but we really appreciate the fact that all presenters have agreed to stay in order to help us answer your questions during the Q&A when we're done. We will understand if you need to log off, but the session will be recorded. All the material that can be recorded will be, and it will be shared with you next week. All of our Defeat Duchenne family forums would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. We want to sincerely give a thank you to our presenting sponsor, PTC Therapeutics, and all others. Our gold sponsor, Sarepta Therapeutics. Our silver sponsors, Italfarmaco, Catabasis, Pfizer, and our bronze sponsor, Aventis. And you'll hear from many of these sponsors later today with updates on information and the research that they're involved with. A very encouraging morning of information, I think. Now, before we begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Catherine DeBerger, President and co-founder of La Force DMD, a Quebec-based organization advocating on behalf of Duchenne. Mary Catherine will be presenting in French. Mary Catherine, over to you.
Bonjour. Bon, je sais que plusieurs ont été là dans les autres présentations. Alors, je vais faire court. Je suis Marie-Catherine. Je suis la présidente de la Fondation La Force, mais avant tout, je suis une maman, comme la plupart des gens qui sont à l'assistance aujourd'hui, d'un petit garçon qui a la dystrophie musculaire de Duchenne. C'est une journée très intéressante pour nous les parents aujourd'hui, car pas la journée, mais le webinaire aujourd'hui, parce que tout notre espoir est souvent orienté vers les recherches, les nouveaux traitements qui s'en viennent, et puis c'est toutes ces compagnies-là qui deviennent pour nous un peu trouver quelque chose. Puis je sais, pour les avoir visitées quelques-unes d'entre eux, rencontrées dans des conférences différentes, que c'est des gens qui prennent vraiment à cœur la recherche, et puis leur but ultime est de soigner et de guérir nos enfants. Donc, pour moi, c'est des gens très importants. Je suis vraiment contente qu'ils puissent nous parler de où est-ce qu'ils sont rendus. Et je suis contente aussi de me joindre avec Jessie Journée pour vous présenter ça, parce que le moteur de la force, c'est l'union fait la force, et j'y tiens depuis le début. De s'unir ensemble, on est toujours plus fort. Donc, je ne vous prends pas plus de temps et je vous laisse entre bonnes mains. Merci.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eric Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman is a human geneticist and transitional researcher focused on neuromuscular disease and skeletal muscle tissue in health and disease. Currently, he is an Associate Dean of Research at the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, Binghamton University. In the private sector, he's co-founder and CEO of Reveragen Biopharma, co-founder and vice president of Agata Biosciences, and co-founder and president of TRiNDS LLC. Dr. Hoffman will be presenting in English and joins us today to talk about the great strides being made in bringing Vamorolone to Canadians. Dr. Hoffman, my pleasure to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Rick. I'll be talking about an update to the Vamorolone program. If I could have the next slide. So we all know that corticosteroids like prednisone and deflazacort keep boys stronger for longer, but that benefit or efficacy is balanced with side effects. And there's quite a number of side effects, including weight gain, bone fragility, growth stunting, cushionitis, and moody behavior changes. Next slide. What the Vamorolone program did was take the prednisone and deflazacort backbone. Here, the prednisone is shown in blue, the actual chemical, back one. And then tweak it, just change one bond there shown in red, Vamorolone's in red. And so we sort of twist one part of the drug, of the structure of the drug. And what we've done is shown that that separates out efficacy from side effects and imparts quite a few different features to Vamorolone that are different from prednisone and deflazacort. Next slide. These drugs bind the glucocorticoid receptor. That's a mechanism of action. And here, what we're showing is the drugs, both prednisone and deflazacort, Vamorolone and prednisone, nestled into the receptor they bind that mediates their effect. And that's the yellow surrounding it. We're not showing the whole receptor, but just the contact points of the drug. And where that red arrow is again that twist, where we've changed the chemistry and now cause the drug to twist in the receptor and change its interactions with the receptor. Now, the glucocorticoid receptor is what's responsible for most of the anti-inflammatory effect of prednisone and deflazacort, but these drugs also bind the mineralocorticoid receptor. Prednisone is what's called an agonist. It turns it on and it changes salt balance in the body, and that's thought to add to the cushionic and some of the fluid balance disturbances. Vamorolone reverses that. It does the actual opposite. So it turns it into an antagonist, inhibits the mineralocorticoid, And that makes it similar to a player known as spironolactone, which are heart-healthy drugs in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So this is just more detail on the differences between deflazacort, vamorolone, and prednisone. But a key thing is that co-activators are things that bind to the drug and the receptor that seem to mediate side effects, whereas co-repressors mediate benefit. And at the bottom, you see how much vamorolone has changed those interactions. So we have about a 4-fold increase in the beneficial interactions that are anti-inflammatory, and then a loss of the co-activators, which is more of the side effects. Next slide. So just to summarize vamorolone mechanism of action versus corticosteroids, we've retained this anti-inflammatory efficacy. We've gained some membrane stabilization properties that should protect against dystrophin deficiency. We've gained this mineralocorticoid antagonism, this heart-healthy potential activity. And we've lost the transactivation, which is mediating many of the side effects. Next slide. So now I'll go over the clinical trial experience, and we are currently in our what's called registration or phase 3 trial. So finishing this current trial, which is recruiting at 4 sites in Canada, in Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, and Calgary. We just have a couple patients left to recruit, and we should read out that trial at the end of the year, and that would become the drug registration trial for drug approval, the data supporting that. That's called the DVP 15-004 there, shown in the bottom. And that's 4 to 7 years steroid naive, 120 boys. It's enrolling in 33 sites in 11 countries. It's supported by the European Commission through a large grant through Horizons 2020, as well as the National Institutes of Health in the US. I'll show data on the previous trial that just finished 2.5 years of treatment. There were 48 boys who started to be enrolled in 2016 in what's called a dose ranging and dose finding study. So we tested 4 different doses of vamorolone. And we looked at pharmacokinetics and how the drug was metabolized, a lot of safety outcomes. But then that led into like 24-week or 6-month treatment period at these 4 different doses to look for efficacy, to see benefit. And I'll show some data of that. Of those 48 patients enrolled, 46 completed the 6-month study. 2 dropped out just because of logistics, family issues getting to the sites, etc. Of those 46, they all elected to enroll in what's called a long-term extension study. So that was a 2-year treatment period shown there on VVP15 LTE. And of those 46 participants, DMD boys, 41 finished 2.5 years of treatment just last month, the last patient, last treatment. So I'll show some data on that as well. And of those 41, almost all have asked to remain on vamorolone instead of transition to other standards of care like deflazacort or prednisone. And so those are now in expanded access or compassionate use programs. I should give some call outs to the study chairs, Paula Clemens from the University of Pittsburgh and Michaela Guglieri from Newcastle University in England, the Cooperative International Neuromuscular Research Group, which particularly Calgary and Jean Ma has been a central participant in, and TRiNDS LLC is the coordinating center that ran these trials and is running these trials. Next slide. So this shows some data after 6 months of treatment. And what you see is the red at the bottom is the lowest dose of vamorolone, and then the yellow is at the top is the highest. And so you see the different doses going from low to high. And this is over 6 months, whether the time to stand got better or worse. So if the time to stand got better quicker, then the graph goes up over 6 months. If it got worse, it goes down. And so what you see is the kids in this young age range are without vamorolone. You see steroid naive kids in the middle there, that's Synergy DLHS, are relatively stable in this age range because they're quite young yet. But the low doses of vamorolone did not seem to improve them, but the 2 high doses of vamorolone did seem, and that was to improve the time to stand, and that was statistically significant both within the trial, the different dose groups, And that's now published in a neurology paper last year. Next slide. If we look at other outcomes like 6-minute walk test in the lower left, again, you see this dose-dependent improvement. So kids were gaining about 40 meters in the 6-minute walk test at the higher doses of Vamorolone. And the same with time to run walk 10 meters and time to climb. Time to climb, because it's a complicated test, with the railings, as many of the parents know within the clinic, tends to be a more variable outcome. So it looks, the data is not quite as clean. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this 24 weeks or 6 months of treatment, off to the left of that graph, then patients and their families and the physicians were offered this optional voluntary enrollment into the 2-year extension study. And I mentioned that 46 boys finished 6 months, 41 boys finished 2.5 years, and the large majority continued past that 2.5 years. What we've seen is that parents and physicians can change the dose of Vamorolone as they wish. They can either raise it or lower it within a range. And so 2/3 of families and the physicians have chosen the highest dose possible, which is 6 mg per kg per day. A few have chose to decrease dose from 6 to 2 or 4 mg per kg due to some weight gain. What I'll show now is the midpoint, so 18 months of treatment. Next slide. So here's just an individual graph of each line is a boy, DMD boy, who enrolled into these studies. At the bottom is the first dose group, so that orange is the lowest dose tested. And you can see how they dose escalated, where blue is the highest dose. Whereas those that started at the highest dose at the top, the blue just remained on the highest dose. And you see 2 or 3 there that de-escalated to 2 mg per kg. Next slide. So if we look at efficacy, if we look at the 10-meter run walk, and we compare it to prednisone-treated patients. Now this is Vamorolone over 18 months. Now Synergy Group had done a prednisone trial over 12 months. So we're really comparing 12 months of prednisone to 18 months of Vamorolone. So it's not a perfect comparison. And comparing that to steroid-naive kids, again, matched from this natural history study done by the Synergy Group. And again, you see that both prednisone and Vamorolone improve the 10-meter walk, and that's significant versus steroid-naive. Next slide. Another way to look at improvement over time, drug responsive or drug-induced improvement, is looking at a milestone in time to stand. So Craig McDonald with the Synergy Natural History Study, it's about 400 kids followed longitudinally, up to 8 years with Duchenne dystrophy, and then also some about 100 healthy peers, children. That study in Lancet, published last year, looked at this broad set of data over a lot of Duchenne boys, and noted that time to stand seemed to be a key milestone, where kids that were able to do the time to stand from the floor test in 5 seconds or less, those patients then were either stable or actually improved over time. Whereas those that took longer than 5 seconds to stand up from the floor generally were going to decline subsequently. So the top here shows the kids enrolled into this open label study with the different dose groups. And you see the 5 seconds marked there. And you can see a lot of them are slower than 5 seconds above that line at baseline when before they started treatment with Vamorolone. There you see after 18 months of treatment with Vamorolone, almost all of them have gone below the 5-second timeline. So again, this improvement over time instead of the worsening that's often seen with Duchenne. Next slide. This is a very imperfect comparison, but just to look at 6-minute walk tests. We didn't have 6-minute walk test in the Synergy Natural History Study on very many patients at all. So here's the Translarna label in Europe where it's approved. And you can see the natural history. These are steroid-treated kids that then have Translarna added onto in general. And the Translarna deflects that curve, but you see the 6-minute walk declines both in drug-treated and non-drug-treated or corticosteroid-treated over a function of time. Now the Vamorolone kids on the bottom are generally younger than the patients up above shown in those top graphs. But again, in 2 of the dose groups, the 2 higher dose groups, then you see the improvement of the 6-minute walk test over a similar time frame of about 8 treatments. Next slide. A key goal of the Vamorolone program was to improve the safety profiles of, that are seen with corticosteroids like deflazacort or prednisone. So at this point, we have long-term patient drug exposure data, which is often called subject years or patient years. So this is, if you add up all the DMD boys that are being treated at high dose Vamorolone and just normalize to how many years of experience you have, that becomes a key safety database. And so right now we have 106 patient years of experience with Vamorolone. So this early in the program, that's a good safety database. And that's because we're unusual in testing young children before adults, relatively large first-in-patient study. A large majority have elected to continue treatment. So even though this was beyond even now the trials going on for 2.5 years, the patients and families wish to remain on Vamorolone. And so this strong safety database relatively early in this rare disease development program is promising. So today we have no serious adverse events attributed to the drug, so no serious adverse event at all. Of course, Duchenne kids themselves can have serious adverse events that lead them into the hospital, like a bone break, but these couldn't be attributed to drug. Next slide. So then we did comparison of some published safety data of prednisone and deflazacort compared to Vamorolone. So one of the key concerns of parents and patients and families is the stunting of growth seen with corticosteroids. It really slows down the growth velocity, as most know, and with that they become much shorter than their peers, and the families themselves acknowledge that this is one of their major concerns with corticosteroid treatment. And so you see that stunting of growth with those negative red numbers for both deflazacort and prednisone. These are how many percentage points you're going away from healthy peers. And so this is about 11% decline for deflazacort relative to peers in the growth rates, and 7% for prednisone. And this is from the GRIG study, one of the key studies that was used for approval of Emflaza. Whereas with Vamorolone, it actually goes a bit in the opposite direction. So we see no, sorry, last slide. We see no deceleration, we see no growth stunting, even in any individual patients. If anything, they're growing a bit faster. Could be because of some recovery of muscle function. So Vamorolone clearly does not lead to stunting of growth in DMD boys. Next slide. Another thing you can look at is patient-reported adverse events. So you can look at, for example, cushingoid. And the physician will, when he sees the boy taking the drug, will just say, does the boy look cushingoid with the cushingoid face or not? And so in the GRIG study, deflazacort, 60% of boys showed cushingoid and 77% with prednisone, 12% with placebo, whereas with Vamorolone, we're just seeing 2.6% of cushingoid. Weight increase, as I mentioned, some boys with Vamorolone do experience weight gain, and some families have decreased dose because of that. But that rate, at least by physician reporting, seems less than it is in, with deflazacort and prednisone as reported in this GRIG study. Next slide. So in summary, all efficacy outcomes show dose-dependent improvements over 6 months. All efficacy outcomes show improvement over 18 months of treatment. Efficacy of Vamorolone seems similar to corticosteroids compared to a synergy natural history study, although there is no head-to-head studies yet. The 004 trial that we're finishing enrollment in, that's the so-called registration or drug approval study, does have a prednisone arm in it. So some patients are randomized to prednisone, placebo, or 1 of 2 doses of Vamorolone. And then after 6 months, everybody crosses over to Vamorolone. So the prednisone treated blinded patients in the first 6 months, and then receive Vamorolone in the second 6 months, and then we have expanded use and compassionate use so that families can take Vamorolone as long as they wish with their physicians. Efficacy of Vamorolone is similar to corticosteroids. Biomarker changes. I didn't show biomarker data, but biomarkers when you take blood tests can be used as what's called objective outcome measures, because it's hard for a patient to imagine their blood profile getting better So if you see those changes in the blood, it's more objective and should give you a more objective view of how the drug's working. And so all our biomarker changes fit with what we were seeing clinically, and that's published now. Objective safety outcomes indicate a benign safety profile, no growth stunting, Christian-like features less, and no serious adverse events attributed to the drug. This slide I didn't update to the 106. So as I mentioned earlier, we're enrolling into this registration trial in Vancouver, Ottawa, Calgary, and Montreal, as well as 10 other countries. There's about 10, 15 slots left in this trial, and then we should be able to close it by the end of next month, hopefully. You know, Vancouver has, I know COVID-19 has slowed things down for everybody, including us. We've just learned that Vancouver is now been one of the earlier sites, fortunately, they reopened to randomizations, which is promising there. And next slide. One thing I want to mention is well, I'll talk about Jesse's journey in the next slide, but just if anybody's interested in more information, Suzanne Gaglioni is the patient. She herself has a son with Duchenne. She works for Reveragen, one of the 10 employees, and she is a great person if you have any questions. And I've also listed the site PIs, the physicians at the 4 Canadian sites that are currently enrolling. We also have a National Institutes of Health funded grant to return results to patients from the trial so that the families can see the actual data on their own son in that trial. So what drug was he taking if it was blinded, how did he respond relative to the other kids in the trial? And that we're also now disseminating that so anybody that was in the previous trials can get that information now or when the future trial ends. Now with Jesse's journey, we've had a long history of Jesse's journey back to when it was first started, and I participated in some of the early meetings in London, Ontario, and Jesse's journey's had a great impact on the field. Jesse's journey has recently partnered with the Vamorolone program to support a new clinical trial called 006, which is a very broad age range. So it's 2 years old to 4 years old, as well as 7 to 18 years old. So all the way from 2 to 18 years. And this includes kids that were already treated with corticosteroids, but then transitioned to Vamorolone. Jesse's journey has supported this under a venture philanthropy model, which means shared risk, but shared benefit. So for their investment, the agreement is signed so that when Vamorolone is sold, Jesse's journey will get 400% back on that investment. So it's called a venture philanthropy model. And we've done that also with Muscular Dystrophy Association, Parent Project, and MDA. So this venture philanthropy model is becoming more common. It makes sense because then you can return some of the investment from the foundation. So we're grateful for Jesse's journey to do that. Duchenne UK is also committed to support sites in the UK, and we have a grant pending with the National Institutes of Health for US sites. And I thank all these other foundations and governments that have supported the Vamorolone program over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. And Rochelle's asked me to apologize to you that some of the slides, they moved automatically, so they were a little beyond her control. But we want to tell you what a pleasure it is for us to support your work, and thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate it very much. I'd now like to introduce Brett Billmeyer from PTC Therapeutics, the presenting sponsor of the Defeat Duchenne Family Forums. Brett is a member of the patient engagement team at PTC. He unknowingly began his career as a patient advocate when he was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder back in 2009. And Brett has experienced firsthand the frustrations of being diagnosed with a rare disease. So over the past 10 years, he's worked with several other rare disease communities and has helped them establish their own patient advocacy organizations. He's been working with the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community for the past 4 years. He continues to fight for the patient's right of access to quality care and for their right to be treated with compassion and dignity. Brett will be presenting in English. Brett, over to you.
Thanks, Rick. And again, it's an honor to be here. And it doesn't seem that long ago that we were presenting last year at the first Defeat Duchenne program, but it is an honor to be here. And you guys have been an honor to work with. And again, we appreciate everything that you've done. For the introduction, it did talk a little bit about my background. And when I was first diagnosed with my rare disease, there was not a whole lot of hope out there. I was the first patient on a clinical trial, and I just kind of stuck with it. And it was one of those situations where I was kind of lost and didn't have anybody to talk to. So that's kind of where I started my patient advocacy career. And it was important for me to help other people that are in that situation as well. And part of my job at PTC is to get to know the families and to help them through their journey as well. As patient engagement, we listen to the families, we learn what's important to them, and then we bring that back to our team. And again, PTC, it's important for us to learn about you guys, and we do definitely want to be part of your treatment. Next slide, please. PTC was the first company that actually started in the Duchenne space. We've been around for about 22 years. It was a small biotech. It's a small biotech company whose founder, Stu Peltz, he's still the CEO at this point, and he's been committed back 22 years ago, just as committed back then as he is now. He's been committed to the Duchenne space, and we continue to grow. We have about 700 employees. Actually, it's probably a little bit more, and we're actually into about 20 countries right now. Not only Duchenne, we have started working on different genetic disorders, Duchenne and spinal muscular atrophy, oncology, gene therapy, and some other different disease states that we are working on. But again, we are still committed to the Duchenne space. The more we grow, the more resources that we have to put into the Duchenne space. We are not simply there for you in the rare disease journey, but we are there with you because we know that family gets strength from one another. We're in this together. And again, that's still the same message that I had when I was first diagnosed almost 13 years ago. It's important for the families, and I understand that. Next slide, please. Everything PTC does is dedicated to improving the lives of patients with rare, difficult to treat genetic disorders. For over 20 years, we have been dedicated to providing new innovative therapies to patients with rare disorders. We are determined to deliver on that commitment. And this slide shows the history of that commitment that we have to the Duchenne space. Again, 22 years ago is when the company started. It started with the Translarna discovery. And as you can see, as we went on, we continued to fight for the Duchenne community, and we were committed. As you can see, in 2015, we got Translarna approved in Europe, and it's also approved in several other areas of the world right now as well. We're working with the FDA to get it approved in the US and then hopefully in Canada in the near future as well. Next slide, please. As I said, in patient engagement, big part of my job is just to learn about the families and what's important to them. And listening to the families, these are programs that we have developed because of what we're hearing from the patients. This Duchenne and You program on the slide, it just is a website that just gives you different information about Duchenne. The Siblings program is a first-in-kind program for siblings of Duchenne in clinical trials. We have learned from some families that have more than one boy with Duchenne, and one of them may have qualified for the clinical trial, but the other did not qualify because they didn't fit the inclusion criteria. So we thought it was important to allow these families to have both of their boys on the clinical trial if they chose to do so. And after it goes to an open label, then the boys can qualify to be on the clinical trial as well. The Strive Grant is an annual competitive grant program for patient advocacy groups. And then we have Decode Duchenne that we sponsor. Again, it removes the financial barrier of genetic testing. Peer Navigator program is something that we heard from the families that was important to them. When you first get diagnosed, you're kind of lost. You don't know exactly where to find different information. And we have some different navigators that the patients and their families can talk to just to learn a little bit more about their experience. And finally, the PTC Cares program. Next slide. We understand that caring for a loved one with Duchenne takes a team, and it starts with you. We talk about this team. You are the coach. You are the one that's in the center of it, and this is what this slide is kind of talking about. You are right in the middle. There's a lot of people that you need to be on your team. The big thing is you're not alone. We are there for you. You know, the neurologist, your care team is there as well. And again, you're not alone, and there's others there for you as well. Next slide. And this is kind of one of my favorite slides, actually. It's got a lot of words on it, but in general, it's basically talking about measured by moments. For the last 22 years, there's some ups and downs for us. We know ups and downs for families, definitely. For me and my rare disease, there's ups and downs. But the The highs might be real highs, the lows might be real lows. But again, part of it is that we are there for you. We are not simply there for you in the rare disease journey, but we are with you because we know that the family gets its strength from one another. And anything that we can do for you, we definitely want to be there. Next slide, please. And I know this was really quick. And again, I just want to save time for the questions at the end. If you have any questions or any comments, please reach out to me. My information is on here, or you can get it from Jesse's Journey as well. I'm happy to help, and I wish that we could have been, if we could have done this in person. I look forward to meeting you hopefully in the near future. Hopefully this COVID doesn't last for a long time. Unfortunately, nobody knows, but again, we do appreciate it. In Jesse's Journey, we do appreciate all that you do. And we again, thank you for the partnership, and we do look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Brad, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to have you join us. We're thrilled with the partnership with PTC and the support for the family forums as well. Now, as expected, just for everybody's information, we are running behind schedule. We thought we would with the jam-packed agenda that we had, but so much good information. So we ask you to please stay with us. We will allow time at the end for your questions for sure. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Joanne Donovan. Dr. Donovan has worked as a staff physician at the VA Boston Healthcare System since the late 1980s. She has held an appointment at Harvard Medical School since 1990, and most recently as Associate Clinical Professor of Medicine from 1998 to July 2011. Now she works as Chief Medical Officer at Catabasis Pharmaceuticals and will be presenting today in English. So Dr. Donovan, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here with Jesse's Journey. We have, this is our second year here, and we're delighted to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about our etasolinexant program. Etasolinexant is an oral NF-kappa B inhibitor in development for the treatment of Duchenne. And on the next slide, we have a forward-looking statement. We are a publicly traded company, and I will be speaking about things that happen or may happen in the future. On the next slide, etasolinexant is an oral drug in development for potentially everyone affected by Duchenne, regardless of mutation type. It's an NF-kappa B inhibitor. It's not a steroid. We have data supporting etasolinexant for treatment alone, and we also believe that etasolinexant could be potentially used with other treatments, such as exon skipping and gene therapies as they come along. We've seen in the phase 2 study that etasolinexant preserved muscle function and substantially slowed disease progression while being well tolerated in the MOVE-DMD trial. So today I'm going to introduce etasolinexant and how it works and talk about our phase 3 Polaris DMD trial. Etasolinexant is an investigational agent, and it's currently not approved in any territory. On the next slide, now etasolinexant inhibits NF-kappa B, and we designed it that way because of the potential for broad therapeutic benefit in Duchenne. When boys with Duchenne are born, they lack dystrophin, but it takes several years sometimes for the symptoms of the disease to be noticed. What happens during that time period? It's not only the absence of dystrophin, but it's using their muscles, creating mechanical stress that leads to chronic NF-kappa B activation, leading to inflammation and fibrosis, and creating a cycle of damage. So our intention by inhibiting NF-kappa B is improving skeletal muscle. It's also helping cardiac muscle. We know that NF-kappa B activation is important, and we know that in older boys, the cardiac manifestations are quite important. And lastly, we know that NF-kappa B activation and inflammation is important in the bone disease that we see in Duchenne. And we hope to see a decreased risk of fractures. On the next slide, we have at this point a fully enrolled phase 3 trial called Polaris DMD that is designed for global registration. We've enrolled boys from 4 up to their 8th birthday, boys that are not on corticosteroids for at least 6 months, and in fact, almost none of them had ever been on corticosteroids, or almost all of them had never been on. I've got too many negatives there. It is a placebo-controlled study, as the regulators wish to see, with 2 boys receiving etasolonexant for every 1 boy receiving placebo. After 12 months, all of the boys have the option to receive etasolonexant in our open label extension, along with their eligible siblings. We enroll boys that have not been on steroids because there is a potential partial overlap in mechanism between etasolonexant and NF-kappa B, and that they both inhibit NF-kappa B. The boys enrolled in the trial were also able to be on a stable dose of Exondys 51. Preclinically, we saw that etasolonexant in combination with exon skipping almost doubled the amount of dystrophin produced. We expect to have results from the phase 3 trial in the 4th quarter of the year, and pending positive results, then we hope to file these next year with FDA and subsequently in other areas. In today's environment, it's worth saying a note about COVID-19. We're fortunate in that the trial has been fully enrolled. We have seen, as I'll tell you, that the drug is quite safe, and we've been able to expand telemedicine visits to allow patients to be seen at home. And importantly, we are also looking at measures that are important in the daily lives of boys. So if the boy cannot come to the site, we've been developing ways of assessing them remotely for the visits. We're certainly closely monitoring the situation. It's good to see things are improving, and we don't think this is going to have any impact on the trial being complete later this year. On the next slide, our primary endpoint is the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, which you're probably familiar with. It includes activities such as climbing stairs, rising from a chair, getting up from the floor. And we're also looking at the 3-timed function tests that are usually used in boys of this age. We're also looking at other additional assessments. We're looking at growth, we're looking at heart measures, and we're looking at bone measures. We're working with Dr. Leanne Ward of the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, who you probably know is a leader in this area, and looking at bone measures to get more insight into what happens in bone in these young boys, and also to see what happens with etasolonexant as they continue on that. And on the next slide, here's a map of the clinical trial sites for Polaris. We asked patient advocacy organizations, families, and physicians for their input into designing the trial. We've been able to limit site visits to every 3 months because of the safety profile. And we are listening to parents looking at measures that are representative of everyday life. There are 3 active sites in Canada: Cam2 Nguyen at CHU Saint-Justine in Montreal, Hugh McMillan at Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, and Jean Ma of the University of Alberta. And Craig Campbell has been involved with the program since the beginning of the phase 2 study as well in London. On the next slide, I also want to mention Galaxy DMD, our open label extension, which means that everyone participating in Polaris will receive etasolonexant. We heard from families that had sons participating in the phase 2 MOVE DMD study that they had other sons that were affected by Duchenne and wanted them to receive etasolonexant. So we have been enrolling eligible siblings in the Galaxy study. So once boys complete Polaris and continue into the open label extension, their siblings will have the opportunity to receive etasolonexant. Now, the primary focus of the open label extension study is to continue to evaluate long-term safety in boys. And there, because of the safety profile, we've been able to extend visits to every 6 months. Now, turning to, on the next slide, what we have seen to date in the phase 2 study, really a proof of concept study. We saw in this trial, we looked at things ranging from how does the drug inhibit NF-kappa B as it's intended to, all the way to functional improvements. And we saw that the drug in young boys did inhibit NF-kappa B. We saw improvements in biomarkers such as CK, muscle enzymes early, and as well as biomarkers of inflammation. And we also saw a decrease in heart rate, which is also a biomarker essentially for cardiac involvement that we see early in the disease. We used muscle MRI to be able to understand what happens with the boys. We looked at them prior to starting on etasolonexant, and then we looked as they continued on etasolonexant. And importantly, we were able to see changes in MRI, which is correlated strongly with functional measures in these boys. And we saw that the MRI showed disease progression prior to starting on etasolonexant. And we saw that on etasolonexant, they were stabilized in a statistically significant way. So we're very excited about that. And lastly, we looked at functional measures with this internal control to look before boys started on etasolonexant and then after they started on etasolonexant. On the next slide shows an example for the North Star ambulatory assessment. The boys in this study, and you know there's a lot of variability, but the interesting thing about the study design is we were able to look at the same boys before and after they went on treatment. Before they went on treatment, they were declining in terms of their North Star ambulatory assessment. And then out to a year and a half, they were stabilized rather than continuing to decline as you might expect. We also looked at the time function tests, and the graphs indeed look very similar in terms of decline before and then stabilization once they were on etasolonexant. On the next slide, turning to safety, in the MOVE-DMD trial, we have over 60 years of cumulative patient exposure, now well over 100 combined. And most of the adverse events that have been seen are quite mild in nature. The most common is mild and transient diarrhea. That doesn't seem to be a longer-term issue. We haven't seen any serious adverse events on treatment in this study, and labs, including chemistries, measures of hematology, and measures of adrenal function have remained normal throughout the study. We haven't seen the known side effects of steroids, as you might expect, because the structure of etasolonexant is nothing like a steroid. We saw the boys continue to grow along their normal growth curves, as we know is very important to parents, and did not gain excess weight and continue to increase in height. So on the next slide, before I wrap up, I'd like to introduce the Catabasis team. We are a close-knit, passionate team. We're now not close together. We're all working from home, but we are working hard to develop a potential new therapy for families with Duchenne, and with the hope of benefiting everybody that is affected by the disease. We're laser focused on etasolonexant, and we recently announced a partnership with Duchenne UK to expand to non-ambulatory boys and young men and look at the effects of etasolonexant in a phase 2 study. So next slide, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. For those of you who are interested in seeing updates along the way, we share frequent updates on social media, the Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can sign up for our community newsletter that comes out regularly. Thanks so much to Rick, to Jennifer, to Marie Catherine, and to everybody at Jesse's Journey. Thanks so much.
Joanne, thank you. And thank you to Catabasis for your support for these events. Now I'd like to introduce Anna Christensen, lead project manager of strategic solutions at TRiNDS. Anna has been passionate about finding ways to help people with disabilities to improve their function, participate in communities, and advocate for their needs in clinical drug development. Her work is to engage with families, providers, and community organizations so they can understand exciting development programs and participate in clinical trials that matter to them. Now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Anna, who will be presenting in English this morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for making time on what hopefully is a more beautiful Saturday than we're having out here on the West Coast. My name is Anna Christensen, and I'm the patient science liaison for Italfarmaco. I'll be sharing on their behalf about their Givinostat development program. Next slide. So first, a few things to know. First, I'm an employee of TRiNDS, a contract research organization, and Italfarmaco has contracted with TRiNDS to provide patient advocacy services. Givinostat is currently in development for the treatment of Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy, and it is not approved for sale anywhere. And this presentation is intended to share scientific information with people like you. Next slide. So there's really 4 things to remember when you're done today. First, your muscle cells are supposed to repair themselves after they're damaged. And in DMD, this is one of the things that doesn't work properly. Givinostat is an investigational drug designed to make this muscle repair process work more normally. And I'll run you through some phase 2 clinical trial results that showed a delay of disease progression compared with natural history data. And last, I'll share about the phase 3 clinical trial open now at sites around the world. We do have an open label study available for some people who don't qualify for the randomized trial. Next slide. So first, muscle cells are repairing themselves all the time, and what they're repairing is damage that happens in routine everyday life. This is things like working too hard at the gym or having a really minor injury. And so if you click next. So, and then when the damage happens, your cells release a switch that would normally prevent the repairs from starting too soon. And when the switch is released, the repair mechanisms get started. Next slide. And when the repair mechanisms get started, your proper function of the muscle cells is restored, and the repair mechanisms stop and go back to the off position and wait for damage to happen again. And this is happening all the time in your body, in your muscles. Next. And so if you're someone with Duchenne, the idea is that your muscle cells get damaged and then are not able to repair themselves properly. And as you probably heard in prior webinars, when you're missing dystrophin, your cells get damaged more easily, so you get damaged more often. And then because you're missing the dystrophin, the signaling doesn't work quite right. So you can hit next. And when the signaling isn't working well, the repair mechanisms aren't as efficient as they're supposed to be. So you can click next. And so when that happens, whenever your muscles get damaged, scar tissue and fat cells accumulate, which prevents the proper function of the muscle cells. Next. So Givinostat is an investigational drug. It's important to know it does not change anything about your dystrophin. It doesn't correct the main problem with Duchenne. What it does is it acts like that missing signal. And so if you're someone with Duchenne and you're taking Givinostat, the idea is that you would still have too much damage because you're missing your dystrophin. Your body's natural signaling would still not be correct because you're missing the dystrophin. Click next. The idea is that the Givinostat would act like that missing signal. Next. And what it would mean is that by allowing the repair mechanisms to work more normally, you would see reduced inflammation, increased regeneration, and reduced fat and fibrotic replacement. And so that's the idea that they've been testing in their clinical development program that I'll tell you more about. Next. So you may have seen my colleagues present at prior webinars and conferences if you've been able to go. And so I'll just run through these with you at a high level. If you're interested in more details, email me later and I can send you links. So in the mouse model of muscular dystrophy, what we see when they take Givinostat is an increase in muscle fiber diameter, so bigger muscle fibers, a reduction in fibrosis and inflammation, and better performance on a mouse treadmill test. When you look at givinostat in our phase 2 study, after 1 year of treatment of boys with Duchenne, we saw the similar biopsy results that we saw in the mice. And then we also saw slower disease progression on MRI compared to historical data. Givinostat's been studied in other populations, not just Duchenne, so we have experience from over 500 subjects. And the side effects we've seen is a reduction in platelet cell count, diarrhea, abdominal pain, vomiting, and increase in triglyceride blood levels. Next. So the original cohort of phase 2 participants, most of them continued onto an open label extension study. And so that means we have data of more than 6 years of their experience on givinostat. And our scientists have been comparing their functional tests to the functional tests of boys who are enrolled in a natural history study, so didn't get any new treatment at all. And what we see is a delay in disease progression. So we see that in the loss of ambulation, delayed time to rise, and pulmonary function testing. So we see the same types of progression, but we see it later. So this is all very interesting, but this was a small study. It was only 18 participants with this long-term data. So if you go to the next slide, that's why Italfarmaco launched their phase 3 clinical trial, was to really explore this further. And so it's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study enrolling 160 ambulatory boys worldwide. And the primary outcome measure is the 4 stair climb. So we're interested in what is the difference in function between people who took givinostat and people who took the placebo. We're also looking at other functional measures such as 6-minute walk test, time to rise from the floor, the North Star ambulatory test, and MRI. MRI is a non-invasive test where they use magnets to take pictures inside your muscles. And we do have 3 Canadian sites. We're very pleased to have Dr. Ma at Calgary. We have Dr. Selby in Vancouver. And closer to you guys, we have Dr. McAdam in Toronto. Next slide. So every study has rules about who can and who cannot do the study. This study is no different. We are trying to find boys with Duchenne who are ages 6 or older, able to walk, can climb stairs and get up off the floor, and are taking steroids. Boys also need to be able to tolerate the MRI and need to be able to do the stair test consistently. In this study, we've been looking for 2 groups of participants who have different levels of fat that we can see on the MRI. So there's 2 groups of kids that we're looking for, and we're looking for different numbers of kids in those 2 different groups. And I'll tell more about that in a moment. In terms of who should not do the study, it's not allowed to be taking other investigational drugs at the same time. You can't be taking other muscle strength drugs, idebenone, exon skipping, premature stop codon read-through drugs, or anything else that could affect your strength or muscle function. You also can't have ankle contractures, you can't need surgery soon, and of course you need to be healthy enough to do the study. And so I will share our clinicaltrials.gov number in a moment, and you can read all of the inclusion criteria there. Next slide. So here's the study design and how it works in the trial. So first, participants would complete 2 screening visits and run a lot of tests to make sure that the study is a safe idea and that you're a good match for the study. And if everything looks okay and you still want to do it, then you would travel to receive your muscle MRI. And then you would return back to your site to have your baseline visit. And at the baseline visit, the study doctors will tell you whether you are whether you can continue with the study, and then they'll tell you which MRI group you're in and whether or not there's still enough space for you in your group. And if you're not, I'll tell you more about what happens. If you are eligible and there is space, then you get randomly assigned to receive either the givinostat oral liquid suspension or a placebo for 72 weeks. And then you would receive 2 MRIs. And as you can see here, there's more study visits at the beginning of the study than the end. And the reason is that we need to be watching very closely for any safety problems that might happen so that we can respond properly. At the end of 72 weeks, everyone is invited to continue in an open label extension study where everyone receives the givinostat. Next slide. Your study visits will look a lot like your multidisciplinary clinic visits. There's a few things that will be different. First, we'll have you do some informed consent paperwork. You will be doing the typical physical exams, height, weight, and vital signs, things like that. Your physical therapy tests might be more strict than your normal tests. So there might be rules about who can and cannot be in the room. They probably will have more scripted responses than you typically see in clinic. The last one that's different is the MRI. And to do that, you enter a scanner and it uses magnets to take pictures inside your body. And it measures the amount of fat inside your muscle. And the givinostat or placebo, you can see the way the bottles look there. It's a liquid oral suspension that you take twice a day after food. Next slide. So I mentioned the open label extension study, and there's two groups of people who can do this study. First, of course, if you finish the EPIDIS randomized trial, you can continue in this study. Second, if you finish your screening visits and everything looks good and you get to your MRI and you learn that there's no more space for your particular group, you can skip ahead to the open label extension. Of course, you do need to meet the rest of the inclusion criteria. This is for the people where there's not enough space for their particular MRI group. And the primary outcome measure for this study is safety, and we also are looking at long-term function. Next slide. And of course, we just reviewed the two different groups who can do the study. You still can't take investigational drugs. You still can't take muscle strength drugs. And of course, you still need to be healthy enough for the study. Next slide. And the way it works is that you still have more frequent visits at the beginning of the study because we still need to watch the safety. The difference is that everyone receives givinostat oral liquid suspension. And our goal is to learn about the long-term effects of givinostat on function, strength, breathing, and quality of life. Next slide. So here's how you can learn more. Of course, you can look at clinicaltrials.gov to see all the criteria and see all the site information. You can always watch one of our presentations that we've done with the community. And last, you can email or call me anytime. I'd be happy to talk with you and connect you with the site. Next slide. But we would really like to thank all of the families around the world who've participated in the study, all the researchers and all the patient groups who've really made this trial a success. My last note is that if you are already participating in the trial and have questions about the study, be sure to contact your principal investigator or your study coordinator. They will know all the details about how it works at your particular site. So thank you so much, and thanks so much to Jesse's Journey for allowing us to participate. And I'm looking forward to hearing the questions during the question and answer session.
Anna, thanks so much. Great to have you join us today, and thank you to TRiNDS for your support as well. As mentioned, we've lost our translator. However, we have Mary Catherine from La Force who's going to be able to translate anything for the French population, and also Rochelle, as we have some time now for questions, and we want to move to those as quickly as we can. So Rochelle, over to you.
Thanks, Rick. So I think we have just one question so far. It is, for the non-ambulatory patients, time is the essence. Is it possible to consider them at the open trial stage, even their age and condition excluded them for the trial? So I don't know, one of our panelists, if you'd like to maybe turn on your video and your audio to help answer this question.
You know, a protocol is like a promise that you make to the regulators and you make to the scientists. And so it's really important to be able to follow it. And so the way that Italfarmaco has handled it is that if you start in the randomized trial and then you lose the ability to walk, you are still eligible for the open label extension study. Yes. They don't kick you out because of your function at that point. And unfortunately, that does still exclude people who aren't able to walk well enough or couldn't get up off the floor at the beginning. And the company is really working on it. They've been running an adult trial of folks with Becker in Europe that you may have heard about. And so we're hoping that that will give us some more information about how people do in the long term at older ages, so that then when the science leads us there, we're able to launch future studies. But we don't have anything right now, but it's something that the company is thinking about very seriously.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. So the next question here says, thank you to all of our panelists. Great job presenting the information for our Canadian families. Once registration trials are complete and successful, will there be opportunities for broader populations of DMD to access treatment through expanded access? So I don't know if somebody, one of our panelists, wants to turn on your audio and turn on your video there, but once registration trials are complete and successful, will there be opportunities for broader populations of Duchenne to access treatment through expanded access?
And I can start. Italfarmaco does not have an expanded access program right now. So as I mentioned, yes, we have an open label extension, but it's really not available for everyone. It's only available for people who either finished the randomized trial or were on a previous trial with givinostat or are otherwise eligible, but there wasn't space for their MRI group. So we unfortunately don't have anything right now, but we're just really focused on getting this phase 3 finished so that we can keep learning about the product and make smart decisions about the science moving forward.
Perfect.
Yes, so the trial is, I mean, we're working with regulators and we're working with the sites to have them open. So I can't give you a precise month, but within the next few months, we're certainly hoping to have sites in Canada. And I mean, it depends on the study results, right? So we would plan to have the interim analysis probably after 1 year to compare to placebo, and then it all depends on the regulators to see what the data looks like and what their opinions are for filing. So it's a bit premature right now to be able to give clear timelines, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Hoffman, I think this one is for you. So we have a question on Vamorolone here. Any thoughts with regards when it will be approved for everyone to access?
The current trial that we're enrolling of 120 DMD boys is the registration trial. So we need to enroll about 10 more subjects. So we're hoping to have that done within the next month. But that would create a readout of 6-month treatment, which is then the registration or FDA approval data. So we're looking at early next year for having that data. And then that starts a clock. And the clock is you meet with FDA, and then FDA deliberates for 6 months or more. So we're hoping to have approval in the FDA in the US by the end of the calendar year next year, if all goes according to plan. Each country has its own regulatory process and its own clocks. And so they're variable length and time. So in Canada, we've done the trials in Canada and talked with regulators, but we don't have that clock quite established yet. And in countries like Canada with nationalized healthcare system, part of the clock is making sure you can negotiate price, what's called health technology assessments or different names for that. And so that takes some time as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. And a question here for maybe all the panelists. If one were to enter a gene therapy study, would this exclude gene editing studies in future?
Well, since I'm already in video and didn't turn it's not really my, I think it would probably exclude joining trials, clinical trials, because it's, you know, there are both types of gene therapy, and that would complicate because of immunity, antibodies, all sorts of things. But as far as in the future, you know, there's some precedent with spinal muscular atrophy where you have both sort of exon skipping type approaches as well as gene therapy approaches that are approved. And you do see patients doing both, or one sequentially, not generally at the same time, but as one wears off and they try the other. So I would imagine that would apply to Duchenne as well. It's, you know, there are concerns about repeat delivery of gene therapy and how long it will last. There's also concerns of exon skipping and the effectiveness of that. So as with any drugs, they all have their pros and cons, and you can often do try to mix and match to benefit the patient the best.
Perfect, thank you. And I know we have people joining us from around the world today. I do have a question. I know that it's quite generalist, so I don't know if anybody will be able to answer it, but this person says, I know it is a challenge, but will be the possibility to extend clinical trials outside of North America. So does anybody want to speak about any clinical trials happening outside of North America?
This is Anna for Italfarmaco. We do have sites in Europe as well. So if that applies to you, please feel free to email us at patientadvocacy@italfarmaco.com. You know, and the regions are something we're always thinking about because, as Dr. Hoffman mentioned, each country has their own regulatory pathway. So it's something that we think about carefully in terms of what's appropriate for which level, for which phase of which trial. So right now, we have sites in North America and in Europe.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for your questions. If you do have any further questions, we are going to wrap up, but you can put them into the chat box. We'll copy all the questions and then send them off to our panelists for answering. And like we said, with that follow-up email, we'll be glad to share their answers with you in that follow-up email. So Rick, over to you.
Thanks, Rochelle, and thank you to all of our speakers this morning and this afternoon, depending on where you are. The content's terrific. The questions were great. Thanks to everybody for staying with us for an extra 45 minutes or so. So thank you again to all, and especially to our sponsors, to PTC as our presenting sponsor, to Sarepta as our gold sponsor, to Italfarmaco, Catabasis, Pfizer as silver sponsors, and to Adentis as our bronze sponsor. And a huge thank you to all the presenters, as we mentioned, and to Rochelle for organizing all this and keeping us, guiding us all the way through these sessions. This is the final one, as you know. Jesse's journey is committed to supporting Canadian families living with Duchenne through education and resources, providing a collective voice to advocate for access to treatments and funding to the most promising research. Because of you, our donors and supporters, we're proud to say that we've received the highest number of research applications than in any other year this year, and we were able to grant more than $1.6 million, including the first venture philanthropy investment of $1 million into the phase 3 Vamorolone clinical trial that you heard about earlier from Dr. Hoffman. This brings our 25-year research investment to over $13 million. Every dollar that's donated strengthens hope for thousands of families like the Eltons. Hope that researchers, and they're working around the clock around the globe, will find treatments and a cure for Duchenne. Like many charities, fundraising and investment have been significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we know if research doesn't get funded, it just simply doesn't happen. Today, you've seen the importance of the gifts from supporters like you who enable the promising pipeline of research to continue and to thrive. We ask that you continue to give what you can in order to ensure research is funded in 2021 and beyond. Whether it's joining our elite group of monthly donors as a Journey Champion, gathering your friends and family to walk to defeat Duchenne in your local community on September 7th, or playing games any way, any day, anywhere as part of our Squad Up gaming event. It's only through the advancement of research and those who face Duchenne that can have hope for a long and inspired life. And it's only through your support that we can make that happen. We hope you will get involved, and please stay in touch. As a reminder, your virtual participant bag, online evaluation, and the program and the event recordings will be shared with you this week. We wish you a wonderful rest of the weekend, and thank you so much for staying with us through this session this morning and this afternoon. Stay well, stay safe, and thanks to one and all.